Putin refused. NATO is ready to shoot down planes near the borders of Belarus. Hungary is quarreling with Ukraine. Poland is opening its doors to the Magyar. Scandal in the ISIS and new strikes on the front. What is happening? Poland is in mourning. F-16 crash. Guidance systems are already looking to the sky. NATO openly states, any aircraft that approaches the 6 restricted areas near the border with Belarus will be shot down. The decision is tough, abrupt and, to some extent, even unprecedented. A new line of fire is being created in the skies over Eastern Europe. Where yesterday there were only alarming radars, real combat crews will now appear. The 6 restricted areas did not appear by chance. Large-scale joint exercises between Minsk and Moscow, Zapad 2025, are starting. And this is not just military routine, it is a demonstration of force that NATO is not ready to ignore. The alliance headquarters say that if any aircraft or drone crosses the restricted area, it will become a legitimate target. And here the main question arises. Who is in the crosshairs? The breakdown of negotiations and a new forecast of war. If you are for a strong Russia, write in the comments, Russia is strong. And let's see how many of us there are. The political background only increases tension. Negotiations on a possible meeting to settle the conflict again are disrupted. There will be no meeting, no dialogue, which means the war will continue. Donald Trump, who is increasingly returning to world politics, unexpectedly made a direct statement. Putin and Zelensky have no desire to put out the fire of war. The phrase is harsh, but in many ways it reflects what the West thinks today. The conflict is dragging on, and the leaders of the parties have no real motivation for compromise. Meanwhile, Moscow continues to strike Kyiv and other cities. The United States records this and makes loud statements about barbarity, but the Kremlin reacts coldly, saying that this is only a response to Ukraine's attacks and NATO's actions in the region. Russian intelligence and drones over Germany. Against this background, Western media picked up the topic of spy games. In Berlin, they are seriously discussing the version that Russian intelligence is actively working behind NATO lines. In particular, strange drone flights over objects in Germany attracted attention. For the first time, the Kremlin officially commented on rumors about a spy operation in the West and did so in such a way that the omission only increased suspicion. Scandal with the prosecutor Muse. Meanwhile, a scandal has suddenly surfaced, which in Moscow will be called karma. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, the same one who issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, has found himself at the center of a high-profile story. He was accused of harassment. The situation is unpleasant. The man who positioned himself as a model of international justice is now justifying himself. They are already writing on social networks. If the truth is confirmed, this is a blow not only to Khan, but also to the entire reputation of the ICC. Strikes on ships and a new loss of F-16. The Frontline Chronicle is being replenished in the meantime. A strike on a Ukrainian and Russian ship is reported. Another F-16 has been lost in the air sector. The aircraft, delivered to Kyiv as a retaliatory weapon, once again failed to withstand the combat rhythm. The Pentagon is increasingly asking the question, is this project too expensive? And in the diplomatic sphere there is a new appointment. The Ukrainian ambassador to Kazakhstan in Wróblewski, famous for his phrases about the elimination of Russians, has left his post. He was replaced by a diplomat who is much more cautious, but no less interesting. Hungary versus Magyar. And here begins a story that could be an episode of a political thriller. Hungary's new worst enemy. Not Moscow and not even Brussels. This is a Ukrainian officer, commander of the unmanned systems of the armed forces of Ukraine, Robert Magyar Bravda. It would seem that an ethnic Hungarian should be close to Budapest, but everything turned out the other way around. Hungary imposed sanctions against him, accused him of attacking the Druzhba oil pipeline and banned entry into both the country and Schengen zone. Magyar's response was not long in coming. His video message to Viktor Orban and Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó sounded like a challenge. Shove your sanctions back, Mr. Dancing on the Bones. I am Ukrainian and I will arrive in my father's homeland after you. There are plenty of real mothers in Hungary, and someday you will get what you deserve from them. Harsh, emotional and, of course, scandalous. Ukraine is discrimination. Official Kyiv did not stand aside. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry called the ban on Hungary discrimination against the Hungarian minority. Minister Andrii Sibiga handed a note of protest to the Hungarian ambassador and said, "We call on Budapest to refrain from unfriendly actions and conduct a constructive dialogue." In other words, Kyiv has effectively transferred the conflict to the plane of minority rights, a topic that the European Union especially likes to play on. Poland is opening its doors, but the real surprise was Warsaw's reaction. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said, "While Russian missiles are sowing death in Kyiv, Hungary is denying entry to a brave ethnic Hungarian who is fighting for the freedom of Ukraine. If you need a vacation, and Hungary does not let you in, be our guest in Poland." In other words, Warsaw is demonstratively opening its doors to the Magyars. Hungary responds, "This is not our war." Péter Szijjarta, the head of the Hungarian Foreign Ministry, immediately responded, "This is not our war. We did not start it and we are not participating in it. Stop provoking us and drawing us into your conflict. Do not jeopardize our energy security." Quote. And this is a very clear position. Budapest does not want to become part of the war. But now Hungary has a new personal enemy, and, importantly, it is not in the Kremlin, but in Kyiv. An unexpected turn. This is where the unexpected turn of the whole story comes in. Europe is accustomed to the conflict in Ukraine dividing the continent into friends and foes, but the reality turned out to be more complicated. An ethnic Hungarian, the commander of Ukrainian drones, has become an enemy of official Budapest. Poland has sided with him. Ukraine is talking about discrimination. As a result, we have a situation in which the war front has passed not only through Donbass or near Kharkiv, but also within the EU. Where yesterday there was unity, today a split is beginning. And against the backdrop of the West 2025 exercises, NATO's readiness to shoot down planes and new scandals in the international arena, it is becoming obvious. The war has ceased to be only Russian-Ukrainian. It is turning into a European one. The story with the Magyars showed that the war has already gone beyond the usual boundaries. Formally, Budapest has always distanced itself from the conflict, insisted, "This is not our war." But now Hungary is faced with a situation where the enemy is not the Kremlin, but an ethnic Hungarian who is fighting on the side of Kyiv. And here a paradox appears. Hungary stands against its own, and Poland supports it. Within the EU, this rift is much more dangerous than sanctions or disputes over gas. In fact, we are seeing how Ukraine is becoming not only a frontline for military operations, but also an arena for the struggle for the loyalty of national minorities. And if ethnic Hungarians in the ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces declare war on Budapest, then tomorrow similar stories may flare up with the Poles, Runes, Slovaks. This is slowly but surely undermining the myth of a united European front against Russia. The main conclusion is simple. War draws in everyone, even those who sincerely want to stay on the sidelines. Systems are on edge. Lithuania is ready to shoot down. China and India are getting closer, and Washington is losing control. At first, it seemed that we were talking about just local security measures. Lithuania announced that its military can now urgently shoot down any air targets that violate the ban. But if you dig deeper, the picture is much more interesting. The Baltics are stepping up measures against the backdrop of Western exercises in Belarus. The United States is confused in its own strategy, and India and China are suddenly starting to be friends. And in all this, one can guess the unexpected architect of change, Donald Trump. The Lithuanian factor of shooting without warning. After the July emergency, when, according to Vilnius, 2 Russian Gerber drones crossed the border, the rules became stricter. Now the Lithuanian military has the right to open fire without lengthy approvals. Not only military, but also harmless recreational flights near the border were specifically banned. Flight instructor Arūnas Rubkas explained, "Amateur drones, hot air balloons, small planes. All this can cause panic. If the object is not identified and does not communicate, it will be shot down." Quote, "From September 12 to 16, the most acute phase of the Zapad exercises will start in Belarus, and the exclusion zone along the border will last until at least October. In other words, Lithuania is preparing for a hot autumn. Any object in the sky is now under suspicion. Trump's mistake. How tariffs turned rivals into partners. While Europe discusses drone threats, analysts' attention shifts to Asia. And this is where the real geopolitical thriller begins. Bloomberg reports, China's leader Xi Jinping sent a secret letter to New Delhi after Trump unleashed a tariff war. China began behind-the-scenes contacts with India in the spring, but the turning point came in the summer, when the White House imposed 50% duties on Indian exports. The reason? Friendship with Moscow. New Delhi buys Russian oil, and for Trump this became a red rag. But his tough move backfired. India and China, countries that could have recently started another border war, are now looking for common ground. Agreements are coming one after another. The restoration of air traffic, the lifting of restrictions on fertilizers and rare earth metals, tourist visas. The economy brings together what politics divided. The main shock. Modi is going to China. For the first time in 7 years, the Indian Prime Minister is preparing to personally visit China. Reuters writes that this will happen on August 31st at the summit SCO. For the West, this event looks like a cold shower. For decades, the United States has been building India as a counterweight to China, but now everything is the other way around. Trump, with his tariffs, has pushed Delhi into the arms of Beijing. Western media directly call him the architect of the U-turn, and Xinjiang is playing the long game. On September 3rd, he will host the parade in honor of China's Victory Day, and 26 leaders will come there. Among the guests are Putin, Kim Jong-un, the UN, Lukashenko, Aliyev, Pashinyan, Tokayev, the president of Iran, Pezeshkian. But who will not be there is Donald Trump. Symbolically, isn't it? Washington is nervous. Against this background, the United States looks confused. Trump is trying to compensate for foreign policy failures by talking about a meeting with the leader of the DPRK, but there is no real effect. North Korea is only increasing its nuclear arsenal and demonstratively supporting Russia. And Europe has a new headache. Russia launched the second-largest attack on Kyiv since the beginning of the war. 600 drones and 31 missiles. According to official data, it was not military facilities that were hit, but civilian infrastructure, train stations, offices of the EU and UK missions, and residential buildings. The first to react was Trump's special representative for Ukraine, Keith Kallick. His words sound harsh. These attacks threaten the peace that Donald Trump is trying to achieve. But the fact is that Moscow and Kyiv are not going to stop. Trump can talk about peace as much as he wants, but without Putin and Zelensky, this peace is impossible. An unexpected turn. And here all the lines converge. Lithuania is preparing to shoot into the sky without warning. Trains and EU offices are burning in Kyiv. India and China are suddenly getting closer, and the United States is losing leverage and looking increasingly isolated. The most ironic thing is that the main turning point was not created by Beijing, Moscow, or even Delhi. It was launched by the White House itself. Donald Trump, trying to punish India for its contacts with Russia, did what Washington had feared for decades. He turned rivals into partners. And now China and India can work together, play against the rules established by the United States. In a world where every drone at the border becomes a reason for shooting, such a friendship looks much more dangerous than any local emergency. The main paradox of the whole story is that Donald Trump, who calls himself a master of deals, has actually become a supplier of the crisis. His tariff attack on India was conceived as a demonstration of force and pressure, but worked like a geopolitical boomerang. India and China, who until recently stood on the brink of an armed conflict, began to look for a common language. For Washington, this is worse than any sanctions failure. The long-term strategy of separating Delhi and Beijing is collapsing. As a result, Trump himself has strengthened what American strategists have always feared, a possible alliance between the two giants of Asia. And this is not just an economic union, but a potential turning point in the global balance of power. Washington is now forced to respond to the consequences of its own mistake, while Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi use the situation to their advantage. It turns out that Trump, by fighting Moscow, has actually given Beijing and Delhi a chance for a new alliance. War without pauses, strikes, negotiations, and a new front in the skies over Germany. Washington once again found itself in the epicenter of a debate about what to do with a war that seems to have long since gone beyond Ukraine. The White House frankly admitted that the U.S. president was unhappy with the news that Moscow and Kyiv were continuing to exchange blows. But even this sounded almost indifferent. There was no surprise. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said it bluntly. He was unhappy with the news, but not surprised either. The two countries have been at war for a long time. Russia launched this attack on Kyiv. At the same time, Ukraine recently struck Russian oil refineries, destroying 20% of their capacity in August alone. The president is closely monitoring the situation, and, unfortunately, the killings will continue as long as the war continues. The words are cold, almost accountant-like. The war has become so routine that even Washington admits, news feeds from the front are no longer shocking. Moscow, there are no prohibitions, no truce. The Kremlin has no answer to this, responded in their own style. The strikes are being carried out on military targets, and no one has promised any truce. Dmitry Peskov assured that the strikes are successful, the targets are being destroyed. The special military operation continues. At the same time, Russia remains interested in negotiations and would like our goals to be achieved through political and diplomatic means. It turns out to be a strange picture. The war is ongoing, missiles are flying, but both sides are simultaneously talking about negotiations. Kyiv even emphasizes that it is formally ready for a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. True, they stipulate that in reality the meeting is unlikely to take place. The Germans remembered Alaska. Against this background, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz accused Russia of disrupting the negotiations. He recalled certain promises made at the meeting in Alaska and said that Moscow had not kept its word. Today we will have to touch on this topic again. And this is against the background of the fact that, obviously, a meeting between Zelensky and Putin will not take place, Merz said, comparing the failed meeting with the agreements that Trump and Putin allegedly reached in Washington. It sounds like Berlin is very nervous. Europe was counting on a breakthrough, but instead it got another exchange of blows and new ruins. Europe is losing its optimism. Just a couple of months ago, Western media wrote, "Peace is near, negotiations, a matter of time." Even the president of Brazil said that everything was coming to an end. Now the forecasts have changed to the opposite. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani stated bluntly, "The war will not end as quickly as many believed. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I don't think solutions will be found before the end of the year." And this is a key turn. Europe, which tried to instill hope in itself, is now preparing for a long war. Drones over Germany, a new front. But while politicians discuss negotiations, the military is picking up new alarming signals. The New York Times wrote, "Russian reconnaissance drones spotted in the skies over Germany." We are talking about eastern Germany, where American and Allied weapons for Ukraine are being transported. In fact, these are NATO's military arteries, and now Moscow is allegedly monitoring the routes, recording who is transporting weapons and where, which companies are involved, how the logistics work. American and European military officials call this a pure spy operation. According to sources, Russia is deploying surveillance of NATO logistics right in the center of Europe. Seth Jones from the Center for Strategic and International Studies noted, "The operating environment for the Russians has become more complex, but it is impossible to rule out that they are acting more cautiously precisely because of the negotiations." The Kremlin reacted predictably, "This is all a hoax." Peskov said that the Germans would definitely not remain silent if foreign drones were flying over their heads. The sea is also boiling. Meanwhile, the war has moved to the water. Kyiv announced that Ukrainian intelligence destroyed a Russian BM missile ship in the Sea of Azov. Moscow, however, denies losses, although Ukraine has shown footage of the operation. Russia, in turn, announced its own strike. An unmanned boat attacked a Ukrainian Navy reconnaissance ship at the mouth of the Danube. Kyiv acknowledged the losses. Ukrainian Navy spokesman Dmytro Pletenchuk reported, "We confirm the fact of the attack on the ship. Most of the crew is safe, but one sailor died, several were wounded." War has once again shown its price: human lives. Poland is in mourning. The F-16 crash. Against this backdrop, Ukraine's allies are also suffering losses. In Poland, an F-16 fighter from the 31st Tactical Air Force Base crashed during a training flight. The crash occurred right during a rehearsal for an air show in the city of Radom, near Warsaw. The plane went down at high speed and crashed into the ground, exploding into a torch. The pilot died. He did not have time to eject. Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz personally arrived at the scene, and the Polish press writes that Prime Minister Donald Tusk also went there. This event has become symbolic. While Poland is preparing for a parade of strength and demonstrating its participation in the military bloc, its own planes are falling in front of the spectators. The main twist in this story is that the war has ceased to be local. It has gone beyond the borders of Ukraine and Russia. Now we are talking about Germany, Poland, the Azov and Black Seas. Strikes are being carried out on factories, on ships, on the skies of Europe. And if at the beginning of the conflict it seemed that we were talking about someone else's war, today Europe and NATO are increasingly finding themselves at the epicenter of events. Drones over Germany, the F-16 crash in Poland, disputes between Berlin and Washington about negotiations. All this shows, the front is expanding, and the end is further away. When will the war end? Even diplomats can no longer answer this question. Europe has moved from cautious optimism to recognition. 2025 may pass to the sounds of the same war.